The world we live in today seems to involve a lot of hate, judgment, and an overall lack of tolerance for each other's differences. Whether it's difference of religion, race, culture, or simply the way someone looks or acts. From things such as bullying to things even as big as terrorism, our world would benefit from a change. Of course, since the world is the way it is, it's hard not to judge and to have a tolerance for others. The hate our world struggles with is a big issue today, and you see it everywhere, and it seems to get worse every year. If we want to see a change in the world, it starts with us. We can't wait around for the world to change on its own. Because of this, I wanted to find something that could have a positive impact on people's judgment and tolerance, and that is why I looked into cultural immersion. For a long time, I've heard stories from missionaries and people who have gone on mission trips. Every story I have heard has mentioned how the trip has impacted their life. A lot of time, their stories talk about how little the place they visited has and how they are so much more appreciative of what they have today. That is just one way a trip like this impacts your life. But I wanted to dive deeper and find out if their cultural immersion experience has had an impact on their tolerance in general. Before I get into the effects of cultural immersion, I think I should explain what culture and cultural immersion are, because these two things are more complicated than you may think. It's hard to put just one definition to culture, because culture has many definitions. I have found 3 different definitions of culture that I think shape culture the best in its many different meanings. First, there is culture as a process of individual enrichment, which I believe means how a person identifies himself and finds self-worth. Then there is culture as a group's particular way of life, such as the clothes they wear, the foods they eat, the language they speak, their social norms, and how they interact with one another. And then finally, there is culture as an activity, activities such as art, music, and philosophy. While trying to discover if being immersed in different cultures makes you more tolerant, I think these 3 definitions shape the idea of culture the best, because culture isn't really a thing and it's more of an idea. Another very important idea to understand is cultural immersion and what it really is. Cultural immersion is very different than traveling to another country for a month for a simple vacation. The definition I think explains cultural immersion best is embedding oneself into a community other than your own in order to understand its customs, practices, and ways of life. When I was looking for people to interview about their experiences, it was essential for me to understand what cultural immersion is, so I could find people who actually have embedded themselves into another culture. Sarah Ashby is an example of someone who has had cultural immersion experience. Her cultural immersion experience was in Costa Rica and Peru, but today I'm going to share about her experience in Peru. Sarah was in Peru for 3 years, and in Peru, Sarah lived near a hill, and surrounding her were cardboard houses and people who had little to nothing. Sarah says she is able to be much more thankful for what she has today because she saw what it was like to have nothing. She said that living in Peru definitely changed how she sees the world and how she sees other people, and she is passionate about helping others that have less than her because of her experience in Peru. Sarah even mentions that how in the U.S. it's easy to forget about how blessed we are because the poverty isn't right next to us. Because of her time in Peru, Sarah is now very passionate about learning others' languages and how other people live. I thought this was great, and I wasn't surprised to hear how her experience in Peru has changed her perspective on the way we live. Sarah does not take things for granted because of what she witnessed in Peru. I wanted to explore how all of her experiences in Peru affected her tolerance, or if it did at all. Before I share Sarah's answer to my question, asking her if her experience has made her a more tolerant person, I want to share a definition of what tolerance is. I think the definition of tolerance really applies well when talking about culture as well. Tolerance is respect, acceptance, and appreciation of the rich diversity of our world's culture, our forms of expression, and our ways of being human. It's fostered by knowledge, openness, communication, and freedom of thought, conscience, and belief. As a whole, this definition really helps me when trying to put together what I mean by tolerance in my question. When I asked Sarah if her experience had made her a more tolerant person or if her experience has made her more tolerant at all, Sarah says she definitely finds that cultural immersion does make a person more tolerant, and there is no way you could come out of an experience like that and not be more tolerant of the people around you. Being in a completely different culture, you are presented with so many different people and lifestyles, which is what helps a person to become more tolerant. Without the experience that Sarah had in Peru, she said she would be a completely different person. Another person I talked to was a lady from my church named Rilla Baca, who spent a lot of her childhood in Panama. She was actually born and raised in Panama, and she lived in the Canal Zone near Panama City. At the beginning of Rilla's second grade year, her family moved to Puerto Ormales, a town that borders Costa Rica. Growing up, Rilla's family spoke English, but she attended Spanish-speaking schools during her early school years. When Rilla was in Puerto Ormales, her school was bilingual. Rilla grew up in Panama, so when she finally moved back to the U.S., there was a huge culture shock. In Panama, people made do without running water and electricity, and in the tropical conditions that Rilla lived in, living without these two things was very hard. She mentioned that in 1979, they went through a period of very severe earthquakes, causing them to go without water for several days. Fire trucks even had to bring barrels of water, causing Rilla's mom to plan out and manage the water use. In Panama, Rilla was introduced to several different cultures because she interacted with oil tanker workers from New Zealand, Asia, and Europe that docked near where she lived. Overall, Rilla says she thinks that growing up in one culture and then being immersed into another culture definitely changes you and makes you a more tolerant person. She says, you learn about people and their differences to others, even to yourself. Cultures are different in what they believe and what is important to them. Rilla even brought up how she still talks to her friends from Panama, and she says they don't take things for granted. Learning about Sarah and Rilla's experience really helped me to come to a conclusion about cultural immersion. Cultural immersion does increase your tolerance. Sarah and Rilla both completely agree that living and immersing yourself in another culture does make you a more tolerant person, and through their interviews, I can see how much their experience has affected their lives and their outlook on the world. You can even tell, just through their interviews, how much more thankful they are for the things they have than most of us are. Of course, not everyone is lucky enough to have a cultural immersion experience like this in their life. A cultural immersion experience is not the only way to change your tolerance and acceptance. But if you ever do get the opportunity to have a cultural immersion experience, it really benefits you and the people around you. Even if you never get the opportunity to have an experience like this, you can still work on your tolerance and judgment. Learn to accept each other's differences and keep your mind open. I'm sure everyone here today would love it if the world was more of an accepting place. So remember, in the words of Gandhi, be the change you wish to see in the world. Thank you.